Hello everyone and welcome to Inking Identity, Indigenous Tattoo Practices, part of the 2022 Spirit and Place Festival. My name is Madison and I am the Public Programs Coordinator here at the Eiteljorg Museum of American Indians and Western Art. It is now my honor to introduce our speaker for tonight's event, Stephanie Big Eagle. Stephanie is the owner and founder of Thunderbird Rising Studios, a handpoke tattoo studio opened in 2021. Born in Honolulu, Hawaii, and of Lakota, Dakota Sioux, Irish, Norse ancestry, she reclaimed her heritage as a young adult after being shown visions by her ancestors and is now an environmental and indigenous activist. She is also the author of Thunderbird Rising, a memoir about reconnection, resilience, and empowerment. Please help me welcome Stephanie to the stage.
Well, good evening. How's everyone tonight?
Good.
Good to see all of you. Thank you so much for coming out. This is an interesting topic that oftentimes doesn't get the space and audience it deserves to be discussed. So if we look back 200, 300 to thousands of years ago, where we stand right now, most people look like me. Most of us had facial tattoos. Most of us were covered head to toe in cultural markings that expressed our identity, and on many levels, physical, spiritual, and cultural. So today I'd like to dive into that, and with that, let's begin. So Indigenous tattoos are beautiful markings that tell our stories. And this is a diverse community and essence of who we are. So, there were many examples of how tattoos could tell our identity and where we came from. And one of those is, we have to go. I lost my pointer. Thank you. My first example is the Gwich'in Nation, which is the Alaska natives from the northern Alaska coast. So here we have a chief Savaya. So his braids and his tattoos would both have told his story. And the more markings that they had within this nation, the more of a higher status they had. So it also indicated which tribe they were from within these Alaskan nations. Picture the two women, Alaskan Native women. The tattoos on the chin were tribal markers. So we have pictured Greet Bergman, who was one of the first in the modern world to take on the tribal markings of her nation on the chin that identified her tribe. And next to her is Sarah Whalen Loon. So she's an Inupiaq artist that is a traditional handpoke tattoo artist that is helping her people revitalize these traditions. So the tribal markings could also indicate one's status within a tribe. So this is a Mohawk chief, and you can see that his face is heavily tattooed and his chest as well. So it indicated that he had a heavy responsibility to carry as a leader of his people. And that was a spiritual leader, a physical leader. He made decisions for people. And so his tattoos would identify his stature within that community. But they were probably also warrior markings, which would tell how many kills he had in the battlefield, how many times he counted coup, what he did for his people. All of that, his story was etched onto his skin. And I'm showing a war club. This wasn't actually his war club, but it's an indication, an example of how within the Haudenosaunee Nation or the Iroquois Nation, warriors would also have the same markings on their body that were also placed on their weapons. So it showed the importance of how these markings, which were their specific signatures. For example, this chief had serpents and birds etched onto his skin. So his war club would have had the same markings, and that's specific to his identity. So he would be the only one who would have had those specific markings within his nation. Amongst the Lakota and Dakota, tattoos served as a sort of spiritual passport. So John Fire Langdeer, who is a Wakan or holy man of the Lakota Sioux, describes the purpose of our traditional tattoos in his book, Langdeer, Seeker of Visions. And this is actually an excerpt from my book, in here. From birth to death, we Indians are enfolded in symbols as in a blanket. An infant's cradle board is covered with designs to ensure a happy, healthy life for the child. The moccasins of the dead have their souls beaded in a certain way to ease the journey to the hereafter. For the same reason, most of us have tattoos on our wrists, not like the tattoos of your sailors, daggers, hearts, and new girls, but just a name, a few letters, or designs. The owl woman who guards the road to the spirit lodges looks at these tattoos and lets us pass. They are like a passport. Many Indians believe that if you don't have these signs on your body, that ghost women won't let you through but will throw you over a cliff. In that case, you have to roam the earth endlessly as a wanagi or a ghost. All you can do then is frighten people and whistle. Maybe it's not so bad being a wanagi. It could even be fun. I don't know. But as you see, I have my arms tattooed. The first picture is an example of a Sioux woman that was painted in a pictograph by Carl Baldmer. He was an ethnographer that went through, and before we had photographs, there were pictures like this that were drawn. And so you see an example of a Lakota woman with her chin stripes, 2 lines down the chin. And on the forehead, she had an honor marking. So these were markings that would indicate her status within the tribe as being a mother or a matriarch, or saying where she descended from, chief lines, or that she belonged to a certain society within her nation. Next to her is one of our Yankton Sioux warriors. So you see the bear markings, the claws on his chest, and you can also see the lines down his arms. So those were indications of perhaps he fought a bear and won, or maybe this was his medicine, his unique medicine. So when he tattooed that on his body, it was like embedding within him a certain spiritual power or medicine that related to the bear. Next is a picture of me, and I'm using this as a demonstration to show that the identity of my tattoos. So on my chin, you can see this is my story. Everything that I've been through in this life is written into my chin. All the obstacles that I've overcome in this life, all the things that I've lost and gained, the knowledge, and the steps that it's taken me to understand my identity. And for within the Indigenous community, a lot of us have been purposely separated from who we are. And this was by design. And so it's been a long journey to come back. For me personally, it's been a very long journey to discover who I am. And so my tattoo honors that journey, particularly on my chin. On my forehead, it tells of my ancestry. It tells that I'm descended from chief lines. It shows my visions, the guiding things in my life that have defined my character and that have helped shape decisions that I've made in my life as far as protecting myself or choosing to follow my heart. And so those visions are etched into my skin. And whenever anyone looks at me, these visions and these prayers are given back to them and reflected back to them. Next is a picture of LaDonna Bravebold Allard. She was an elder from Standing Rock who was very influential, if So most of you probably have heard of the Standing Rock movement. So she's one of our leading elders. And she also taught me about our traditional tattoos of the Lakota and Dakota Nation. And so she's showing her tattoos that she received from me. And I will never forget how she never showed any pain. She's like this superwoman that could just sit there and just tell me stories the whole time that she was being tattooed. Never flinched, never had to move, never had to take a break. She was just made of iron.
My grandma told me, baby, go put something on your body, a butterfly or something, so when they kill you, I can find you in the ditch. That's all I got. And I think, as other people, do they understand the whole idea of having some image, so in the afterworld they know you?
Oh, is that a teaching that she shared, that when you mark yourself and you go over into the other world, is that how she would recognize you? Not from your physical form, but from the markings that you put on your body.
Yeah. But when I leave this world, my relatives can find me.
So this hits a soft chord with me because LaDonna's no longer with us. LaDonna's no longer with us. And so this is one of the last moments that I had with her. And so she was on her deathbed, you know, and she gave her life for fighting for our rights as an activist, for sharing our traditions and our culture. And without LaDonna, I wouldn't have a lot of the knowledge that I do have about my tribe's my tribe's markings. So she is one of a handful of elders who has stood up within the last few years to share this knowledge. And so it means the world to me to include her on this and to share her teachings with all of you, because it's a rare thing. A lot of this knowledge is dying out. And so it was an honor to tattoo her as well and to help her on her journey into the spirit world. So, yeah. A lot of our tattoos are also imbued with power or supernatural abilities. And as tattoo artists, part of our responsibility is to carry ourselves in a certain way so that the tattoos that we place on people will be empowered with mana or spiritual, supernatural abilities that help the person that is being tattooed in their life journey, whether it be protection markings, empowerment, healing, ancestral connection. We're able to do that when we live our lives within a certain way as tattoo artists. And so the very first tattoo that I ever designed was the Standing Rock tattoo. And I designed this in 2016 at the height of the Standing Rock movement. I had just spent a week out at Standing Rock and was fresh in that feeling of when Standing Rock first started. And I will define what the Standing Rock movement is for anyone who doesn't know. So back in 2015-16, there was the Dakota Access Pipeline that was being forced onto reservation lands in North Dakota and South Dakota. And they had already tried to put this through Bismarck, North Dakota, but the people there who weren't indigenous didn't want it there, and they were listened to. They were honored. Instead, the government forced it through reservation land, and the track of the pipeline was to go underneath one of our only pure sources of drinking water. And so many of us stood up and said no. And LaDonna was one of the elders who stood up first and said, we're not gonna have this, and really gathered people together. And so I had gone out and I spent a week out there, and when it first started, it was just so refreshing and beautiful to feel the energy of People coming together and not being concerned about their own needs, but coming back within a community. Everyone wanted to help each other. Everyone said, "How are you doing, brother and sister?" When you walked into camp, people said, "Welcome home." And it really was a feeling of returning home. And that is how things originally were in this land. Tribal communities looked out for one another. It was all about how do we help each other and build each other and strengthen each other up, rather than an individual rat race drive that we see things have been transformed into onto this land today. And so I was coming back from that, rushed, feeling amazing, feeling the energy of what the potential that we have as Indigenous people and non-Indigenous people alike to come together and make a change and to stand up for something that we really believe in. And so with that, I was asked to create a design that would be tattooed and would be a fundraiser for people around the world to participate in, and to get this tattoo in a form of to show their support or to show their belonging with being involved in the Standing Rock movement. But it had a way of bringing everybody together. No matter who you were or where you're from, it was for everybody. And so I'll explain a little bit about what the design meant in the prayer that was written into this design. So the Thunderbird is the essence, is the main part of the design. And so what were we defending at Standing Rock? The water. And so I chose the Thunderbird because the Thunderbird in Lakota and Dakota tradition is who brings the rains every spring. The arrival of the Thunderbirds brings the storms, brings the life. Their thunder fixes nitrogen in the air so that the soil can create life. So without the Wakion or the Thunderbird, we would not have our life-giving waters and everything, the plants growing, the new life that comes with their arrival. And so the Thunderbird also represents Great Spirit. And within the center of the Thunderbird, you see the triangle with the dots, and that represents all the different people who came together to stand as one at Standing Rock. At the bottom of the Thunderbird, it's shaped like a teepee, and that represented the gathering place of all of the leaders and the women who made the choices at Standing Rock. And that choice always remained that we are going to stand together and we are going to be peaceful, no matter what is thrown at us. And that was a very difficult position to maintain because so many people were being hurt. So many people were being treated like dogs, thrown in cages. Our land was being run through, and we had that guidance and that leadership to say no matter what, we are going to remain peaceful, because we have to show the world that we can do this. We can make a change without violence. We can be everything that the government, particularly the Army Corps of Engineers, we can be different, and we have to be that example. At the bottom, the zigzags with the dots represents the river of life, and that is what we were there protecting. The 7 dots represent the 7 bands of the Eiteljorg Nation, and that is the 7 bands of the Great Sioux Nation, which were prophesized. Indigenous communities were prophesized to be the ones who would rise up in the time when we need them most, to bring people together, to promote healing, and to usher the new way into a life of balance, harmony, restoration. And so the bottom zigzags are an honoring to the 7 bands of the Eiteljorg, whose land Standing Rock was on. And so with all of that, within this prayer, and a lot of people don't even know this who received this tattoo, and there's thousands of people around the world who have this tattoo. And they don't understand because I didn't tell them. But part of that prayer that was etched into this is that no matter when, if it's past, present, or future, this prayer will always be carried on. Is that we're asking the Wakians, we're asking Great Spirit for help. We're saying we're asking for protection, and we're asking that in all of our walks in life, when we stand up and we stand with our Mother Earth, that we are protected and we are guided in everything that we do. And so even there's people who come to me today who still receive this marking, and I share with them, thank you for carrying that prayer. Thank you for standing up with Mother Earth. Thank you for standing with us, because we are all children of Mother Earth. And so we all have to carry this responsibility together, and it's the only way that we're going to make the change. So with that, in terms of identity with the Standing Rock tattoo, it's a symbol of belonging to this movement that changed the world and actually brought Indigenous communities to the forefront on an international level. First time receiving major media attention all around the world. So it transformed how we dealt with that, and how you still see to this day, we still have this international platform, which is just amazing. And I see it as prophecy. It's a mark of accomplishment, because we were able to come together and stand against a united force that had weapons, that had Humvees with military SWAT vehicles and fully weaponized soldiers. We were able to stand up against that without backing down for quite a long time. And that's a marking of accomplishment. So it was seen as a threat. At a certain point in time, there was a little file that I was made aware of from the federal agents that said anybody who had this tattoo was a member of my gang.
That's right, we are.
Yep. I just laughed when I heard that, because how appropriate is that? Yep, you're a member of my gang if you have this tattoo now. So the prayer that was imbued within this tattoo, I do believe that it worked. And I say that because of the footage that was captured on this video that I'm about to show you. This was a day before the eviction of the Ocheri Oyate camp in February of 2017. So the day before we were supposed to be evicted, and we had agreed, we had talked with the leaders from their side, and they had talked with the leaders from our side. We had come to a harmonious agreement that we would have time for everybody to get their belongings and safely be moved out of camp. Yet the day before camp, and this was typical of how they treated us, the day before that official eviction date, a group of soldiers charged down the hill, lifted up the fence, and tried to raid camp early. And I was there to witness all of this. And this is right after that happened. And I see the prayers. Remember that the Standing Rock tattoo was asking the Wakina Oyate, or the Thunderbirds, for protection. So watch this.
Watch over us now, watch over us tomorrow, watch over our children, watch over our loved ones who we have left behind, so that we can be here defending our treaty rights, defending the water, defending speaking up for that which seems to have a voice, which actually really does. The earth has a huge voice. We are the voices of the world. We are the voices of the Wakina. We are the voices of the future, and we are the voices of now. We stand here without fear. We know who we are, we see, but we know who we are as well.
So if you couldn't see that very well, did you see the lightning? Yeah. So that is what chased them back up into their cars. Lightning came behind them. When they ran down that hill and tried to run into camp a day early, lightning started striking behind them, and they were scared back up into their cars. So I see that as an answer to a prayer. Most definitely an answer to a prayer. And so that is an example of the empowered tattoo that is imbued with prayer and meaning, how powerful it can be. were the traditional tattooists. Pictured is Fang Odd. She is a 102-year-old Kalinga artist from the Philippines. So she is one of the last remaining old school tattooists that originally tattooed the headhunters from her tribe. And so she actually defied gender norms within her nation, and it used to be only men that would tattoo, but she said, no, I'm gonna do this, this is for me. And now she's one of the last remaining ones of her nation to carry on this tradition. But within the Filipino nation, the art is passed down through the bloodlines. And so those were the traditional tattooists, those who received it from those who bought them. So she's actually teaching her grandnieces the technique and passing it down to them. So within most Polynesian nations, it's usually only the men who are permitted to touch the tattoo instruments. And there's a protocol and a process that they have to go through where they're initiated and highly trained over many years to even be able to touch the tools. So in other nations, it's only women or the matriarchs who are permitted to be the tattoo artists. There is a similarity that I've noticed in my research amongst most nations, which is that traditional tattooists were initiated into their roles and required to follow strict protocol to ensure that their tattoos have power or mana. So it was all around regarded as a prestigious position, a ceremonial position, that you had to be selected. So not just anybody could tattoo you. And you were expected, once you accepted that role, to adhere to a certain protocol. And so this is the artist that I work with at Thunderbird Rising Studios. Myself and her are the handpoke tattoo artists there. And so we have a protocol that we've agreed upon that we practice sobriety. We carry ourselves within a certain manner within our lives so that we are able to channel these designs as traditional artists were expected to from thousands of years ago until now. Indigenous tattooing was nearly eradicated. And so it's, to me, I see it as a miracle that I'm here on this stage right now being able to talk about these things because of everything that we have gone through and how much they tried to take this from us. The power is still there, and despite everything, we are able to continue to share our culture and to revitalize what was so purposefully taken so many years ago. So shown is the Hidatsa chief and tattooist, road maker. All of his markings that you see would have indicated his status as a warrior, but also as a tattooist. So he was very heavily tattooed, but these tattoos also imbued him with power that enabled him to assist others in their markings. The spread of Christianity correlated with the decline of indigenous tattooing. It's a direct relation. So with the spread of Christianity, we also saw the rise of boarding and residential schools. If you aren't familiar with these schools, the Canadian and United States governments legalized the kidnapping of Native children as young as 4 years old. They would place them in these schools where they were separated from their families. And first thing is their hair would be cut, their traditional clothing removed. They were forbidden to speak their language or practice anything of their culture. So I am a boarding school survivor. I'm sorry, I am a descendant of a boarding school survivor. My dad went to boarding school. My grandmother went to boarding school. And so this affected all of us, where my dad doesn't know his culture, he doesn't know his language, and there was no interest in knowing it because of the way that they were treated if they did try to practice their culture, if they did try to speak their language. And so this hit very close home for me as it does for many people within the Indigenous communities. We are all affected by the effects of these boarding and residential schools. And it's just fact that it was mostly Christian priests and nuns who ran these schools, missionaries. And there was a high level of abuse. There was a high level of problems that happened within these. And if you aren't aware, they are just now starting to search underneath these schools for the bodies of children. And so far there have been thousands and thousands of bodies found of little Indian children. So just to give you the reality and the facts of what we're dealing with. One of the first things that was targeted within colonization was our traditional tattoos. So the first to be targeted and eradicated were those who had facial tattoos. So because of that, it was actually outlawed by the United States government for us to practice our traditions and culture until 1978. So that's just 4 years before I was born. 4 years before I was born, it was still illegal for us to practice our traditions. So, because of this, there were many tribal elders who began to forbid tattooing as a form of protection because they didn't want their women, their precious women and men to be targeted and killed because of their facial tattoos. And so with that, you see the decline of Indigenous tattooing, and that's why you don't see a lot of it to this day, and that's why there's still so much of a stigma towards it. So, and that also has to do with the stereotype that exists within most people. It's ingrained that facial tattoos somehow degrade you. Somehow you won't be able to work, or you'll be a lower member of your society. But when you look at the Indigenous culture, the rich history of tattooing that does exist within it, who were the ones that were tattooed the most? The chiefs, the matriarchs, the spiritual leaders. And so when you think of that, of how everything was skewed and misconstrued over time, it's a shame. But here we are, and we're going to reverse all of that. So.
I can go in a community and I can look around and see how much of an influx Christianity has taken in that community. And you'll see a lot of adverse tattoo all over, all this stuff. And it is usually because of the Christian belief that came into the community. Christianity was devastating to our people. So that we have to relearn our own history again. We have to relearn our own culture, our own design, because they try to erase that. And for me, like Stephanie, can you see me? I am alive. Can you see me? I am not invisible anymore. See me.
Can you see me? So, revitalization efforts. Thankfully, despite everything that we've been through, there is a revitalization effort going on an international level within Indigenous communities for our traditional tattoos. Particularly I was heavily influenced by the Maori revitalization. Pictured is the only naval officer in the world at the moment with his tamoko, or facial tattoos. We also have the first female member of the New Zealand Parliament to wear her lip and chin markings, or her moko kowai. So within Great Turtle Island, or North and South America, in Canada, just 7 years ago, there was no one that I knew of anywhere around here that could offer the protocol and the cultural knowledge and even the actual ability to tattoo faces. And 7 years ago is when I first received information that there was the existence of facial tattoos within my tribes. And so I said, this is for me. I followed my heart, and I said, this is what I'm gonna do to help revitalize what I know is right for me and what I know belongs to me. So I traveled over to New Zealand because they have their culture intact still. They have their traditions and their protocol and their cultural knowledge of what the facial tattoos mean, how to apply them, and the traditional artists are highly trained in what they're doing. So I traveled over there and I received these markings that you see, and they were channeled from the artist, particularly for me. And that, I believe, has had a direct influence on revitalization of tattoos within Great Turtle Island. So there's something about a few people taking something on and standing up with it and showing people that it's possible, that other people start to realize, hey, I can do this too. You know, this is for me too, it's okay. And so within that time from 7 years ago, there's been a handful of artists such as myself and Caitlin here that have been trained within the arts, and more people are accepting that tattoos are and always have been a sacred and important part of our culture.
Can you see me? I am not invisible anymore. See me. That's what it represents to me. For so long, people have just made us invisible. For so long, we've been asking for help, and we are ignored. We are invisible. So for me, what's up? I like my tattoos. My grandma told me, baby, go put something on your body, a butterfly or something, so when they kill you, I can find you in the ditch. That's all I want to tell you. That's why the lines that I want on my face are so important to me, because they tell a message. And if we don't tell that message, we become invisible.
So part of telling that message is the responsibility of what a traditional tattoo artist carries. So how do we help others connect to their identity? And so myself and Caitlin have an ability that I do believe that we were born with, and that has been refined over time through our lives and the challenges that we've been through. And as we come more into our own personal identity, we are able to help others connect with theirs. And so the traditional role of a tattoo artist, a traditional tattoo artist, is one of being a channel. So I was taught by the Maori tattoo artist or tamoko artist that I worked with, that part of what we do, and the reason that we get together and we talk about our visions and our stories before we place the markings on the skin, is to give our ancestors, the ancestors of the tattoo artist and the ancestors of the one who's being tattooed, the ancestors get together in the spirit world and they meet. And they decide what the design is going to be for the person who's being tattooed. And the artist has the ability to see that design, to draw that design, or to channel that design down for the person. So that's why when I do these, I call them intuitive designs. I ask someone, tell me a little bit about your story, your ancestry, or anything that's important to you. If you need healing for something, tell me your problems too. If there's something that you're seeking through this design, share a little bit of yourself with me so that I can do that for you. And in this way, we know that tattoos connect the physical, spiritual, and ancestral worlds. The tattoo that you see up here is an example of a tattoo that I created this way. This person was going through a lot of issues in her life, And she was also struggling to reconnect to her identity. Just like me, she was separated from most of her life from her people. And so she didn't know who she was. Even though she carried the bloodline, she didn't know a lot about her culture. So I created this tattoo for her, and she's Navajo or Dene. So it's taking those symbols from her nation and placing them on her body. But also when you place it here, it's like a shield. So she can hold those tattoos up. Whenever she needs to have that protection, she can hold those up and remind herself of who she is and where she comes from. So we're going to start with examples of traditional tattoo tools. On the far side here is an example of a 2,000-year-old tattoo tool that was recently discovered in Utah that would have been used by the Puebloan people at that time. It is 2 prickly pear cactus spines that are attached to a handle of sumac with yucca leaf strips. The tip is still stained with charcoal. So this is an example of a traditional tattoo tool, and from what I've researched, prick it in the skin, and because it's a cactus spine, it's barbed, right? So it's gonna make the skin bleed. And so they would do it that way, and then they would rub the soot in afterwards. Another example of a traditional tattoo tool is these sharpened turkey bones. So this is the oldest tattoo tool that has been discovered in the world so far. And they estimate that it can predate up to 3,620 years ago. And it was found in Tennessee. So that can tell you how ancient our tattoo traditions within North America truly are. So they were also found with what they believe to be a bundle. And bundles are another aspect of how that indicate how sacred and powerful our tattoos were considered in ancient times. So tattoo bundles were only carried by the artist who would be doing the tattooing. Nobody else was permitted to hold these bundles, to touch any of the instruments that were inside of them, and they had a strict protocol that came with them. For instance, if the tattoo bundle wasn't being used, it would be hung on a tripod outside of the teepee in the sun every day and brought inside at night to be protected. And so these were protocols that had to be taught. All artists had to adhere to it. And because of that, these tools held extreme power, or mana. So I'd like to give a little demonstration of some of the tools that I use. LaDonna taught me that within our nation, Lakota and Dakota, we used porcupine quills for tattoo needles. Porcupine quills. I can only imagine how painful that would have been. As you know, they're double barbed, right? So they don't like to pull out of the skin very well. But that's what we used on our nations for tattoos. Here is an albatross bone. And this was, I would say, the Maori nation would have used this. Other nations would have used other kinds of bones for their tattoo tools. So they would have sharpened the ends here, dipped it in the ink, and that's what they would have used for the tattoo tools. This is what I use. This is a sterilized tattoo needle that's attached to a base, and it works in the modern. If I wanted to make a tattoo tool out of traditional instruments, it would take me days to prepare before each session. So it's nice to have the modern tools, and they also are easier on those being tattooed. So it creates a more positive and enjoyable experience for all of us. But it's good to know where we started from. Sage would have been an example of a traditional medicine that was used to purify the space before the tattoo session. So if you don't know about sage, sage has also been scientifically proven to remove bacteria from the air. So we have these indigenous knowledges and ways of doing things that actually really do make sense. So, and this could have also been used for ink. So the sage would have been burnt, and the ash from sage or even cedar would have been used as black ink mixed with a little bit of water or something like bear grease. Seed oils, animal fats would have been used to mix with the ash and to make ink. I have red ochre here mixed with bear grease that makes a red paint. And this red paint is what we used for our traditional war paints, or we would have painted it down the center of our head before we did any important event. But it was also our red ink. Sweetgrass would be an example of something that would have been kept within our bundles and burned to invite our ancestors and the spirit helpers that each tattoo artist had to come into the space and assist with each session. So that's what I have for that. This is an example of a book that you can look into if you're more interested in learning about the different traditions of Native American tattoo traditions. This is an excellent resource if you want to look into that. And so now, Q&A.
All right, I've got some questions back here in our basket. So if you have other questions, feel free to come back and get a Post-it note, and then it'll be way easier than having people shout. So the first question is, you have spoken about the decline of status. How do you see status as an indicator of value, spirit, human, both or neither? How much of your heritage's worth is tied to oppressor's status indicators? Would you like me to repeat the question?
Yes, please.
Okay, so how much of your heritage's worth is tied to oppressor status indicators? And sort of related about the decline of the status of tattooing.
Personally, I have had to go on quite a journey to learn how to uphold myself being free of the restrictions of others' opinions. And I will not lie and say that it hasn't been a very difficult experience for me. And so when we speak in terms of the oppressor, I would say that the hardest part has been the experience that I've had within my own tribe. So, and that's one of the things that they say about genocide, is that you know that you're in the final stages of genocide when the oppressed becomes the oppressor. And so when I first really discovered that we did have a tattoo tradition within our nation, Lakota and Dakota, I thought, wow, everybody's going to be so excited to hear about this. And so I started sharing on social media, but instead I got quite the opposite reaction, particularly from people within my own nation. And I said, wow, this is very surprising and very, very difficult to deal with. The embarrassment that came with that, the questioning and doubting myself, and having to say, did I make the right decision? Did I make the right choice? And so that has been a 7-year, very long journey about learning how to stand within my power and say that I know that I made the right choices for myself. And I'm only just now starting to see the results of that. And so when I address that question towards anyone who's thinking about taking on their own markings within their culture and wondering how the oppressor or the oppressed are going to react to it, I can only say that we are in a time of revitalization, and we are the pathfinders. We are the ones who are making it easy for the children to come, for the next generation to come. And so if you want to do that, you have to be strong. You have to be willing to stand up for what you believe in despite what anybody else thinks about you, because you will be thrown. Maybe Not as much as I was, because I've done a lot of the work for others, but I think that you will have a challenging time. And you have to, that's one of the strengths of it though, is that you learn to stand strong within your own heart. And my life was transformed for the better when I received my traditional tattoos, because I could hear my ancestors talking to me. I could feel their presence. Spiritual doors opened for me that would have never opened if I didn't take this path. I became a traditional handpoke tattoo artist because I received my markings. I was invited to learn after I received my markings. And so I say, if you are worried about what the oppressor or the oppressed thinks about it, you're going to have to let that go. And you're going to have to let what's right for you come for you.
All right, so these two questions are kind of related, so I'm gonna ask them both together. This person asked, can you speak more about the ritual of receiving or giving a tattoo? And then what does that mean to you? But sort of related is, how does a person receiving a tattoo prepare themselves for that journey?
Okay, so we do ask, and this is stated on my website too. I try to make it easy for people because a lot of times I think people are scared to ask, but I do ask that people refrain from certain substances which could place them in a lower vibrational frequency, refraining from heavy recreational drug use and alcohol use at least 3 days before their session. If they're coming to receive traditional facial tattoos, I ask for 3 months. And that's because of the amount of initial hardship, the testing that will come for you when you take on the traditional markings. And so I ask for you to prepare yourself. And it is customary in traditional manner to bring a gift for your tattoo artist. That gift can be, for example, Jo. I tattooed her. She brought me sage from the homelands. Cedar, medicines that can be used to help us say these prayers and to protect ourselves. You can also bring any kind of gift. I received earrings. This is actually an example of a gift I received from one of my clients, that when you're giving gifts within the Indigenous community, if you want to ask a question or you're going to receive something, it's customary to bring a gift for those who you're going to be receiving from. And it's just a way of showing respect and honoring protocol and tradition. What was the other part of the question?
So there was, I love the preparing, but can you speak more about the actual ritual of receiving or giving a tattoo, and sort of what does that mean to you?
Okay, so before I give a tattoo, I prepare the space. The hour beforehand, I always ask to take an hour to prepare before every session. And this is my time to sit and get my mind right, to invite the ancestors and my spirit helpers in. I'm making the tools. It takes a long time for a handpoke tattoo artist to prepare for our sessions. We do everything by hand. And not as long as it took back in the days, but back in the days, they would have had sweat lodges before what was considered ceremonial tattooing. They would have asked for fasting, probably from both the tattoo artist and the person being received, the person who would be receiving the marking. But these days, it's always more of a little fast track process. And so as I'm making these tools, I ask for the assistance of my spirit helpers and the ancestors to come into our sessions and to imbue, even though these are modern tools, it's my hands that's going to be doing the work. It's my energy that's going into these tattoos. And so I invite them in to be present during our session to protect both of us and to imbue this session and the tattoos with their presence and their mana. And so even though we're doing things with the help of modern tools, I feel that our ancestors are present in these sessions. And so I always honor that. I say a little prayer before we begin each session. I burn some sage, I smudge off both myself and my client. And I used to not do this, and I learned the hard way. And that's part of the challenge of being a modern day tattoo artist, traditional tattoo artist, is that a lot of us don't have anyone to teach us, so we have to learn things the hard way. And so I learned that I had to protect myself and I had to protect my clients, but myself. And the way that I learned this is because I was tattooing somebody who had a very traumatic childhood, and this was back in 2017. I was tattooing him, and for the next 3 days I dreamed about his childhood. Not the good parts of it. No. I woke up crying for the next 3 nights, experiencing his childhood for him, processing that for him. And I also had a pain in my back. And I told him, man, my back hurts today. And he said, I bet I know exactly where you're hurting. And he could touch exactly where it felt. And so his energy and his pain was transferred onto me. And so that was a very eye-opening experience that taught me I need to protect myself and I need to protect my clients, because this is not anything to play around with. These spirits are real. These energy transfers are real. And so when you're coming to meet someone like myself or Caitlin for a tattoo, you have to come with respect and understanding of what we're doing and the power that is actually imbued within these tattoos in this session. And so that's part of our responsibility as modern day tattoo artists, is to say this is not just something that's being placed on your skin. This is something that's connecting the physical, spiritual, ethereal worlds, and it's real raw power.
Awesome, thank you. So we have one last question. This person said, first, thank you for celebrating this Native tradition. And their question is, as a Native artist, how do you engage, or what is your stance on tattooing non-Natives with Native tattoos? The question of personal expression versus cultural appropriation.
Okay, so I think that's been a very hard line for me to navigate personally. For a while, I was only tattooing non-Indigenous members or people who would come to see me with tattoos, maybe just sacred geometry. And I've started to change the way I feel about that, because cultural appropriation is when you take something from another nation that doesn't belong to you, and without their permission, without understanding of what it means, just taking it and putting your own twist on it without understanding the implications of what that means. Cultural appreciation is where you're receiving art from someone from an Indigenous community. You're coming, you're bringing the gifts, you're coming in a respectful manner, and you're receiving the art of that person. So if I'm a person who specializes in the art that speaks to me, is it okay for me to give somebody that I feel who comes with that respect and that understanding a marking that is of Lakota and Dakota background or influence? And I think at this point, yes, it is okay. You don't give certain markings that only come from certain families, Tioshpaye's extended families, or things that were unique to someone that you would see as an example of a traditional tattoo. But there are designs that I can create for somebody who's non-Indigenous that are reflected aspects of our culture. For example, the Standing Rock tattoo. I felt strongly compelled when I looked into my heart when I was creating that design that it was a gift for anyone who wanted to carry that prayer, no matter who they were or where they came from. It was a gift for them. A trade, in a sense. You're going to carry the symbol of a very important spiritual being to us to help us to carry that prayer. And so I think within certain circumstances, it's okay for people to receive art from a particular artist when it's done with respect and it's not a design that's specific to a certain tribe, as far as a marking that showed that you belong to that tribe, but something that can be a reflection of that tribe in a sense of that it's a gift to you, that anybody could have this gift. And you'll see that reflected in as well in sister here. I saw her beadwork at the shop, and she says the same thing. It's cultural appreciation that you're buying this beadwork from an artist who has done the work. Yes, these are tribal designs, but it's okay because you're getting it from the right source and you're doing it the right way. Whereas I think it would be a cultural appropriation if you went to an artist who didn't have the teachings, who didn't have the understanding, who wasn't of that nation, and who was taking that and placing it on you. That's very disrespectful and offensive. So when I look to examples, if you go get a tattoo from a Maori artist, you know, I have them. They're markings that are from their culture and are based in their trainings and their understandings of their art. But it's not offensive because it was an exchange that came from that artist, and I'm appreciating their art, and it's what they chose to give to me. So it's still a fine line to walk, and it's a very sensitive issue that I might change my mind on in the future, but for now, that's where I stand.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Can I please get one more round of applause?